r/AskReddit. What's your creepiest glitch in the Matrix or unexplainable thing that's ever happened to you? I was on vacation on Florida visiting a friend. We were walking on the beach on a perfectly sunny day when everything went black for a second. I think it was weird, but explained it away thinking that my eyes were playing tricks on me until he looked at me and said, "Did everything go black for a second?" The gods were quick saving the simulation. Every night I go to bed about 2 hours before my husband. I always wake up when he comes into the room. One night he was gaming with a friend, and it was hours later I heard him sneak into the room and crawl across the floor so he could pop up and scare me. I felt the floor kind of shake and felt him bump clumsily against the side of the bed in the dark. I held out my hand and asked him not to scare me. I was already scared enough and begged him to just take my hand and come to bed. I couldn't see anything in the room, but knew he was there and just waited for him to jump up so I could move on and go back to sleep. That's when I heard him talking to his friend in the other room. I was frozen. I know there's sleep paralysis or lucid dreaming or something that explains this, but I would have sworn on my son's life that someone had crawled across the floor and jostled the bed. Eventually I worked out of the fear enough to grab my phone and text my husband to come in and turn on the lights and check under the bed. But holy shit, it boggles me how real it felt. Eater, thank you for the silver. It's my first. Thank you to everyone who's confirmed sleep paralysis. Kind of comforting to have that as the answer. Maybe if it happens again, that knowledge will help. Also, it was likely inspired by watching Markiplier play Don't Open Your Eyes. Sleep with your doors shut. Kids, you'll thank me later. 3 scary games #36. I shared this a few years ago when this question was asked last time, and didn't really realize how glitchy in the Matrix it was until people started commenting haha. In college, I took a hard news/soft news journalism class where one of the assignments was to write an obituary for one of my grandparents. The professor told us to write it on a deceased grandparent, but if all of your grandparents were still alive we had to choose one. In my case, all of my grandparents were alive. I procrastinated actually doing the assignment until the night before it was due because it seemed like a morbid assignment, especially once all of my grandparents were still alive. Scramming for an easy grandparent to write about, I gave my mom a call and asked her for some basic biographical information about my maternal grandfather. As we were talking about my grandpa's career, my mom couldn't recall the name of one of the companies he worked at. She lectured me about waiting until the last minute to write the assignment because it was late, 10:30 p.m. my grandpa's time. However, she said she would give him a call to see if he was still awake and be able to answer that question once my assignment was due the following morning. When my mom called my grandpa, my grandma answered the phone in a panic. My grandma frantically explained that the paramedics had just arrived and were performing CPR on my grandpa because he had stopped breathing and lost consciousness. My mom was able to stay on the phone with my grandma until they took my grandpa to the hospital where he was declared dead. In the time my mom and I had been talking on the phone about my grandpa's obituary, he was dying. His death was entirely unexpected at that. Although he was in his 80s, he was the healthiest of my grandparents at the time. We ended up using the obituary I wrote for that writing assignment as his actual obituary. Still freaks me out when I think about the timing. It isn't creepy, but when I was in high school I had a dream I was in all white classroom, totally white, like the ones you would see in a dream, and a girl was sitting in the chair on my side. During the dream, I knew it was a dream because that girl was a senior. We didn't have common classes. About 6 years later, I was at a master class. The sun was shining bright outside. The classroom was very illuminated, and I see this girl on my side. We are doing masters together and having a class in all white fucking classroom. Of course I remembered the dream at that very moment. Edit. Woo 6k upvotes guys. Well, did you talk to her? I talked to her after, but as a friend. I did not tell her about the dream. Just for info, I'm a hetero girl, so no, we are not married now. About 2 years ago, I went to collect my husband from the ferry after work. My husband got into the car, and as I was driving very slowly out of the car park we both noticed 2 people standing a few meters in front of our car. It looked as though they were strangers, older looking professionals, both walking to their separate cars in different areas of the car park. The man was reaching into his side bag and the lady was further ahead than the man, with her head turned to the right. I know the exact positions they were in, because they were completely frozen on the spot. My husband and I sat there watching the frozen strangers, not saying anything to each other, and then all of a sudden it was like someone pressed play, and the two strangers just continued on like nothing had happened. My husband and I promised to each other that we would never forget how weird the experience was. I can't remember exactly how long they stayed frozen like that, but it was long enough to freak us both out. Sounds like what improv everywhere does. When I first saw them, I actually expected a flash mob or something to jump out, but no. My husband and I stayed watching them from our car for a while, but they went off in opposite directions and nothing happened after that. It was weird. I have a jade Buddhist necklace I bought in China about 10 years ago. It disappears for months at a time, only to reappear somewhere obvious like my desk, my dresser, in a drawer I use every day. I just say it goes on a trip and will come back eventually. One night more than a decade ago, as teenagers my friends and I were delinquenting outside of a museum. In the grass outside of the museum I found a Taoist/Feng Shui compass, used for fortune telling and the like. I've had it ever since. But it fucking disappears. Like regularly. I've lost it for months at a time before. It's at the point now that when it disappears I'm fine with it. I just say something like it always comes back. And then I find it under a couch cushion or somewhere else it has no business being. It's very strange. To be honest though, since I moved into my current house it hasn't moved. Maybe decided its exploring days are behind it and it's just time to settle down. Around 12 years ago I had a dark purple 3 Series BMW which I drove to work and parked in the same spot for around 3 years. I sold the car due to mileage and wanting something a little more reliable and purchased a different car. 1 week later, I turn up to work to find my purple BMW parked in my parking spot. I was totally WTF. Turns out that we had a work experience kid start that day, and his dad had dropped him off in my old car that he bought 2 days earlier. What are the chances of that? I've never met this kid or his dad, and yet here was my old car in my /its space. Edit. My most popular comment ever. Lots of people saying it may be Techno Schwartz, but I'm pretty sure it was Violet Schwartz. Here's a picture, although it looks way more navy here than in real life. From my potato camera in September 2006. My wife just saw me uploading this and asked what I was doing. We were dating when I had this car and started telling me how much she loved it, bless it. The car wanted one last memory. 1985. My ex-wife and I were sleeping. There was a small sliver of light coming in through the window from a street light, so the room and bed were dimly visible. Our black Pomeranian was at the end of the bed asleep. I dreamt that I woke up, reached down to pet him, and he turned into a glossy black bivalve/oyster thing which opened up to reveal rows of gleaming glass teeth. I woke up to my ex backpedaling up the bed over the pillows towards the wall. I asked what's wrong. She said, what is that shiny black lamb thing with the teeth at the end of the bed? Where's the dog? We had had the same nightmare at the same time. This still gives me a chill. Sorry that your dog was haunted. That's actually a requirement for Pomeranians. Might get buried but oh well. When I played baseball as a kid, they were handing out the trophies at the end of the season. They called out the names of the kids while we received our trophies. There happened to be a kid with the same name as me. We met after the ceremony because it was weird since our last name isn't a very common one. We had the same birthday and everything. We looked alike. Both our dads were named Derek and both of our sisters were named Lily. As a kid, I found it cool. As an adult, I find it cool and also disturbing. There's a podcast called Radio Lab. They did an episode on coincidence that has a similar story about a girl in England that releases a balloon with her name and address on it. It floats some hundreds of miles and lands in a guy's yard whose neighbor is the same age with the same name and has a bunch of similarities. After my little brother was murdered the next morning, I was talking with a friend and he mentioned this other dude I went to high school with younger brother had died in a car accident a couple weeks before. Later that day I pull out a slip of paper with this other dude's number and name on it from my pants. I vaguely remember running into him a year or so before this at a club where he gave me his number. I swear I had worn and washed these jeans at least a dozen times since I had run into this dude. I still makes no sense how that paper was there and I only found it then. I called the dude and we talked a bunch. It really helped me deal with the situation. Are you still in touch with him? I talk to him every once in a while. We both have busy lives.